everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Lei-Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you please help us get the word out about this podcast to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I read a free weekly newsletter that I just sent out that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, in great weather, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, back to summer. Good morning. This is your co-host Lei-Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and this is episode number 139. Let's get right into it. Stellantis, LeapMotor, we've been hearing rumors about it for months, and the way it came out was slightly surprising given the XPeng VW deal before it. It was structured differently. But man, I guess the word that comes up would be bang. I mean, Stellantis was done, and then they come right back with this deal. And kind of, like we're in it again, almost.
So let's give a history lesson, Lei. Can you talk a little bit about?
Well,
let's do this.
How far do we go back?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's actually pretty important, though, right? Like
it is,
because we can talk about FCA a little bit, and then how that turned into Stellantis, and then Tavares taking over at Stellantis, and then kind of the GAC. So can you give us a bit of a history lesson on that stuff?
Well, for as long as I can remember, Stellantis is the Stumblelantis in China. Because
in China.
Stumblelantis, because they've stumbled.
Let me stop you there. So it's Citroen, Peugeot, Jeep. What
Fiat,
other brands do they sell? Fiat,
Lancia, Ram.
Yeah.
Maserati.
No, that sell in China. In China.
Yeah. Well, Maserati sells in China, but
yeah.
I mean, if we go back to AMC, Chrysler, Jeep, Fiat Chrysler, and then merging with PSA to become Stellantis. The only operations they have is DPCA, which is the Dongfeng Peugeot Citroën joint venture.
Right.
Still producing Citroëns and Peugeots. That's it.
And they officially stopped building Jeeps like 2 weeks ago or last week.
So, a few months ago.
Sorry.
Yeah, I guess. Or even, was it last year? Or...
I think they announced it, but I think they actually shut it down recently.
Yeah. So I mean, from that perspective, that's what I said. Stellantis is done in China, but then this deal proves kind of, you know what? You don't have to be in China or even produce in China to play the smart EV game in China. I thought that was the interesting thing about this. I said this is a brilliant chess move by Carlos. And,
But that's only recent, right? Because historically, you did have to be there. You did have to build locally.
Yeah.
And so this is a new wrinkle with how business has evolved. And we can talk a little bit about this later, but I'm in disagreement. One of the few times you and I will vigorously disagree about a subject. But let me also add that FCA, because of the situation with Sergio Marchionne and the potential merger between FCA and PSA Group, that took a while. And so there wasn't a ton of investment, new products that were launched into China. And the Chinese partner was getting a bit upset, GAC. And then when it was announced that the new Stellantis CEO would be Carlos Tavares, they were not thrilled because his reputation in the industry is purely as a cost cutter.
Well, he's
And
the Carlos
so,
Ghosn scion or protege, right? So, yeah.
yeah. So the first thing that he did was the first major thing was try to acquire a larger share of the joint venture. And GAC balked at that. And you know this story, Lei. GAC was so unhappy that they refused to change the joint venture
Yeah.
name.
That was just, yeah, it just wasn't in sync. I mean, it was, yeah, disastrous, basically what happened.
And
Yeah.
so it used to be called GAC FCA joint venture, basically. And they didn't want to change it to GAC Stellantis. And back to, they wanted to actually double down. And GAC was like, no, you can't do that. You didn't tell us you wanted to do that. You just made this announcement. And so I don't think GAC thought they were going to pull out of the market. But then Carlos Tavares and team basically said, okay, well, if we can't acquire more, then we'll just leave the market. And so that was a little over a year ago. And Carlos, throughout this year, has been pretty vocal about the threat of Chinese EVs in Europe. He never called them cheap or subsidized. He just called them, I think he was very honest about that.
Well, right? I mean, this time he called it the Chinese offensive. That's what he called it. So
yeah. And I would like to think that he's had conversations with Macron's administration. And that's part of the reason why the EU, or one of the reasons, there could be many, but one of the reasons the EU set up this what's it called?
Anti-subsidy probe.
Anti-subsidy probe was because of the French government's objections to allowing free reign of China EV Inc. into the European market. Okay. So that gets us to 2 days ago. And you and I had heard several times that there were European companies, Stellantis, Mercedes in particular, that were kicking the tires on some Chinese EV companies.
Yeah.
And so with Mercedes, it's a NIO tie-up. But with Stellantis, I had heard, a couple of different companies, LeapMotor being one of them. And as of 2 weeks ago, Lei, you and I had heard that announcement was imminent.
Yes.
So the announcement was late, a week by my prediction, but it still happened. And so let me ask you, the 20%, too much, not enough, just right? What do you think about that?
It's actually 21.3%.
Yeah.
For 1.5 billion. Whatever it is, I don't look at it too much or not enough. Right now, they're the second biggest shareholder behind Zhu Jiangming and his wife and some other guy. I think they hold 27.46%.
We should also let everyone know that LeapMotor is a publicly traded company in Hong Kong.
Yes, Hong Kong listed. And also, before the transaction, Dahua, which is the security surveillance company that Zhu Jiangming is chairman of, had the second biggest shareholder. So Dahua is out. And now it's Stellantis, as what Carlos calls the reference shareholder.
That's his original company and startup that allowed him to launch LeapMotor.
Yeah. So from that perspective, if you compare it to the Expo 4.99%, that's much more aggressive. And LeapMotor at the same time, I think it's willing to give that up in order to get the, I think there's compromises made or I think if you look at it, it's not only the desperation on the Stellantis side, but it could also be the desperation on LeapMotor side that made this happen. So it's 20% or majority stake. I think it's difficult at the beginning to have a foreign company taking a majority stake in a Chinese pure EV startup. That would be unprecedented, right? So that's how I look at it.
Let me double down on that, Lei, because I think that this transaction obviously needed to be blessed by the Chinese government. And they were probably going to have a say in how much of the company could be acquired, right? So I don't know if there was any input from the Chinese government about this 21.6% or whatever you said.
21.3%, yeah.
Yeah, so let's just say that they both settled on that number. and felt comfortable with that. Now, we should also note that LeapMotor sold 15,000 vehicles in September. So they're not one of the better players. Their vehicles are the most expensive vehicle is around 250,000 RMB, I think. The cheapest is around 140, which makes it about a $15,000 car and a $40,000 car. So they play in the mass market.
Yeah, so let's say among the 4 listed companies, startups, they play in the most affordable segment,
Most
100,000, right? And actually, I think in that conference call, Carlos said they rank number 4 in the pure NEV startup, and they're breathing on number 3. So I don't know what ranking he was referring to, but come to think of it, out of these 4 companies publicly listed, I think, I was saying in the other chat group that LeapMotor was really the only candidate or option based on their playing the affordability segment. And also, I mean, NIO is too much. Volkswagen already has Xpeng. The auto is not a BEV.
It's too much.
Yeah.
It's also too much.
So that only leaves LeapMotor. And LeapMotor is looking to expand globally, is looking for capital. And Stellantis at the same time is trying to find a way back to being relevant. Maybe not in China, but having a brand, as Carlos said it best, that we need to take on the Chinese with the Chinese brand. That's why, I after seeing hearing his explanation, I kind of became a fan of Carlos purely for this business strategy.
Well, but I mean, there's precedent, right? Like Tesla is killing it, and they're not a Chinese brand. So you can be successful in China and not be a Chinese brand in the future. I think that I just have a hard time with his
rationale,
his rationale is solid. I guess it's a trust thing for me, and it's a be careful of what you say, because he said really extreme things. You weren't wondering what he thought. So
I think it was back around CES or earlier this year that he kind of hinted that Europe needed to place, tariffs or additional kind of restriction on the Chinese EVs, because he again said they're 30% more cost competitive. And even with the 10% tariff, they can still eat that up and compete in Europe.
Oh, that's nothing to them. Right. To China EV Inc., 10% tariffs is nothing.
Exactly. So, and I think the other 2 things that I really liked that Carlos said was, one, the Western automakers are going south in China, and they're playing with the plug-and-play Western formula in China, which is going nowhere. So I love the fact that he said that, where the other ones are still in denial.
You basically love it because he is talking.
He's blunt.
He's saying he's saying what we've been saying for the last 2 years, basically. Yeah. That's why you like it.
And then the other one is really recognizing the competitiveness, not only cost competitiveness, but technology, battery, energy management system, all of those that, which still others are also in denial, maybe.
Well, the denial part is definitely becoming less of an issue, because, and we'll jump back to talking about Stellantis because we're not done, but GM this week acknowledged that they're going to be putting LFP batteries in the next gen Chevy Bolt that is going to use the Ultium platform. So effectively, that's a plea to the U.S. government. I look at that as a plea to the U.S. government about sorting out the trade policy for the Inflation Reduction Act on the LFP side. But anyways, the history with LeapMotor, they started out with a very small coupe that was about $15,000 or $18,000. It sold nothing.
Yeah, I remember that launch event very clearly. January 2019. Yeah.
And so recently they got into EREVs, and it creates a lot more flexibility for them. And subsequently, you saw an increase in sales because they now have, and I don't know.
Also better margins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that CO2 still on sale? Because I don't think it is, right?
Which one?
The coupe?
No,
the first coupe?
No.
Yeah, okay. I didn't think
it's
so.
it's called the S01 or something. They have the T03, which is the small hatchback, and then the C01 sedan and the C11 SUV. And then the C10 is coming out later this year, which was at Munich.
And it should be noted that there are very famous mergers and transactions in automotive history that never amounted to anything. The most recent mega failure is probably DaimlerChrysler.
Well, Denza, BYD, Denza,
Denza.
Mercedes.
Denza's
it's not
okay.
a failure, but
yeah,
Mercedes, I don't know what they got out of it, but
So when you look at LeapMotor sales, for the people that are the sticklers to BEVs versus EREVs versus hybrids,
yeah,
the sales number is a combination of EREVs and BEVs. So for LeapMotor.
So LeapMotor, I listened to a little bit of their Q3 earnings call to catch up on information, and they want to do 30K a month next year, and they're seeing 18,000 in Q4. So they have a lot of ambitions. And then the other perspective that makes this interesting is because of Stellantis' exposure to Latin America, Africa, Middle East, which is seeing these Chinese offensive. And so Stellantis is trying to leverage its LeapMotor to defend that Chinese offensive, basically. And I think that's yeah. No, I'm just saying that the international JV, which Stellantis is majority owned, basically Stellantis is taking over the international operations of LeapMotor. That's a simple way you look at it, which was really surprising to me.
Well, I look at it like Stellantis is the international operations of LeapMotor.
Yeah, exactly. And the way it came out was a bit surprising because all of us thought Stellantis is going to use one of their platforms to do a car or something, but
I think they'll do both.
Yeah, that wasn't explicitly said in the announcement. So
I don't think that could be. I don't think at this point in time that's politically tenable. I don't think that with the EU probe kind of the overshadowing this announcement, because the only way this makes sense is if Stellantis, to completely unlock the value of this $1.5 billion euro transaction, is to license those platforms. Now that creates another challenge because now Tavares needs to answer to not only likely importing a Chinese brand into the European market,
and he has his skin in the game because right,
yeah, but there's a high likelihood that these LeapMotor cars will undercut Citroën, Lancia, Peugeot vehicles. So now the only way this makes sense is licensing these platforms, EREV or the BEV platform, or it's one platform that is flexible for Peugeot and Citroën to use. So he's still got some political landmines in 2024 that he's going to have to deal with, but it automatically catapults Stellantis into future contender and long-lasting legacy automaker. But we also need to see these numbers come to life or come to fruition for LeapMotor to get to 18 and then to 30, because remember, next year is probably going to be over 10, 11, 12,000 or 12 million NEVs sold in China. And 300,000 is actually pretty insignificant. 360,000. If they get 30,000 a month, right? That's 360,000 units on a base of 11 million vehicles is not really a winner. And that's not sustainable if you're going to be a healthy car company in China. So
yeah, so that's why this is both in my mind, it's both a steal and a huge bet on LeapMotor being successful and getting to to that, level of relevancy in China. So, history will tell, right?
Yeah, I admire Tavares for swallowing his pride and kind of ignoring his previous comments. That's fine, but he'd be a hard person to trust for sure if I was a business partner of his.
He kind of said in that conference call that he wasn't. He stressed, he was adamant that Stellantis wasn't the instigator, wasn't the advocate for that anti-subsidy probe, and he's like, whether we have it or not, we're gonna face the Chinese offensive. So so we take an offensive, we take a step early to confront that offensive by basically putting LeapMotor as their 15th brand. That's what it is.
Yeah, and so two European legacy automakers now have invested decent amounts of capital into Chinese EV companies. Let's put this to bed, not you and me, but everyone else, let's put this to bed. Chinese EV technology is like world-class.
Yeah, I think it's recognition. The key word is just recognition and recognizing that they have to somehow utilize this.
If
right?
I'm gonna throw out there something for you to chew on. If I'm BYD, I'm cutting margins in my emerging markets and in China to squeeze LeapMotor. That's what I'm doing. I'm specifically creating marketing to compare my vehicles to theirs, and I'm squeezing it.
So speaking of BYD, I think I just saw this. BYD, SAIC Motor, and Geely are the first three companies that the EU Commission is investigating with that probe. Not surprising because SAIC Motor has MG, BYD expanding tremendously. Geely, right? They have their bunch of their brands in Europe, so we'll see what happens there. Yeah.
Speaking of Zeekr, they're having a huge event right now in Beijing at the
Zeekr and Jiyue, two Geely brands.
So it's at the Bird's Nest.
Bird's Nest, yeah.
I'm sure you've seen pictures. I've seen pictures.
I just tweeted some stuff. Yeah, the FR001 FR,
and what's the race driver's name? Kimi
Räikkönen.
Yeah, so he's now a brand ambassador.
Chief Performance Advisor, CPA.
Yeah, so he's a ex-Formula One race car driver. So and this is the schizophrenia of Zeekr. The 001 is this super performance coupe, and then they have a Zeekr X that is kind of a mass market small vehicle.
Yeah.
And then they have an MPV.
Now the pricing coverage of Zeekr goes from like roughly 180,000 RMB to all the way to 769,000 for the FR. That's a huge, delta for one brand.
And Porsche doesn't even need to see the vehicle; they just need to see that price and feel threat.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly. Yeah,
because there's going to be buyers for it, and Porsche should feel very threatened that Zeekr is looking into the 600,000-700,000 RMB price range. So 700,000 for our audience is about 100,000 US dollars. So
yeah.
Let me see. What else did you want to talk about, man?
No, I think the UAW strike was we had some progress, which it kind of came early a little bit. I think you had predicted sometime before Thanksgiving and after Halloween. At least we got Ford to a tentative agreement, but that's...
let me kind of break that down and summarize that for a second.
Yeah.
So top pay hourly rate was around $32. It's going to get to over 40 by the end of the 4-year contract, and then on top of that, we have to calculate fringe. So in the finance world, in order to forecast salaries and employee costs, we normally add 25% of whatever the hourly rate is, and that's the fringe. That includes health benefits and any other non-salary benefits. So these guys are getting paid over $50 an hour, which ends up being around 85,000 US dollars a year without overtime. So UAW workers are very, very well paid relative to the average salary of a US citizen, which is closer to 40,000, I think. So
well paid is exactly.
I'm not saying, and let me be clear. I think you and I, let's be clear. We're not saying the work is easy, but $90,000 is, I think there's going to be a lot of people that want to be auto workers once they see that big number. Okay. And for the sake of full disclosure, my father, 27 and a half years in GM assembly plants and GM factories. So he was a UAW guy. So
yeah. Well, it wasn't surprising to see Ford get that done because Ford had the most, I guess, membership, right, in the first place. But I thought the interesting, bigger picture here is seeing there's a few things that happened. So Honda scrapped that affordable EV deal with GM. Ford is pulling back $12 billion of investment in EVs. GM is...
Because they don't have it, like...
Right. So that's the, that's the taking two steps back now in the US, that the EV penetration take rate is flat, that they're seeing these inventory increasing and people not buying EVs, which is that momentum is gone all of a sudden.
So I have to point to my my newsletter that I just sent out this morning. I had to jump on my soapbox moment about some of these articles that I'm seeing lately about EVs aren't working, blah, blah, blah. Now, Jim Farley and Mary Barra and those guys were lying from the very beginning. They were never going to get the number of vehicles, number of EVs that they said they were going to get. Okay. So they created this false reality that people, and I get it, the media needs to just kind of report on what's being said. But you and I, who follow this daily and understand how the China market works, knew that those numbers, the hundreds of thousands of units
by
400,000 was
units.
never realistic, never realistic. And so the whole thing about, and the US is not going to be China, Europe's not going to be China, things aren't going to happen as fast. There's going to be ups and downs, but we should be holding these CEOs accountable. And Toyota, yeah, he was right. It's going to be lumpy. And we said this all along, but that doesn't change the fact that these CEOs need to do their best to make this transition work, okay? Because it's happening. And the reality is, even just Tesla in the US market, even if China EV Inc. takes 3, 4, 5, 6 years to enter the US market, Tesla's going to push them.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's affordability. And we do not have that.
Full stop.
In the US.
Let me read a paragraph I wrote in the newsletter. Let me start by asking, who is going to buy a 9,000-pound Hummer for $120,000? Also, hand building battery cells, modules, and packs doesn't make for an efficient manufacturing process. And then next, EVs seem to be working just fine in China, so much so that 2 of the largest European automakers bought stakes in 2 Chinese EV companies. So what are they doing right? Or maybe the question needs to be, what are we doing wrong? So I'll stop at that, but that was my soapbox moment. And it just needed to be said that they created this unrealistic EV future, and it's harder than they've ever imagined it would be, because they're getting squeezed on both sides, and the ICE side is not because of the economic conditions here, right? The economy seems to be doing good. It's a little schizophrenic, but interest rates are super high. So car buying is going to be down lower on the totem pole, and EV inventories are up, but we still have a lot of challenges ahead of us. Reshoring some cell capacity, whether or not we're going to allow Chinese EVs into the market and at what price. So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that creates a lot of uncertainty for the OEM management. This is great for us because we talk about it every week, right? So it's never boring.
I think here in the US, kind of the double whammy that you talk about affordability from a cost competitive point of view, it's not there. And then from the kind of the economic interest rate environment, it's not there. And actually, have you seen the gas prices actually have been coming down the last few days or a week or so? That doesn't help.
Yeah.
EVs, right? But so are you still thinking of pulling that trigger? Model Y prices went up by $500.
I fixed my car because there was a check engine light on, so I fixed it, and so I just want to get it through winter and reassess. But if I need to pull the trigger in December, I will do that. It's still fairly affordable. Speaking of the T company, did you see that BP is buying $100 million worth of chargers from Tesla?
Yeah, that's yeah.
Oh man, the strong getting stronger, because now even if you have a Ford or a Kia, you go to an EV station and you see a Tesla charger, it kind of reinforces the Tesla brand. And so maybe your next car is going to be a Tesla EV now instead of a Kia or a Ford or a GM. So I don't know how many chargers, because they didn't specify the per unit price, but that's a big win. And hopefully it injects some, let's say, urgency into these charging hardware providers, because studies,
third-party ones.
Yeah, research says that most of the chargers in the US in the foreseeable future are going to be level 2 chargers, and the superchargers that Tesla have are level 3. So there's still an opportunity, but with Li Auto and now Zeekr going with the 800 volt charging capabilities with their vehicles, it's only going to be a matter of time where charging times are going to be much lower than they currently are. So
yeah, I saw those Li Auto mega charging speeds, 500 kilowatt.
Yeah, it's amazing. The battery will probably last about 2 years, but that's okay.
I mean, there's this saying called the second half of this smart EV game in China. I think it's now entering the second half of that second half, whereas probably the foreign legacies are still in the first half or warm-up stage.
Yeah,
that's how you look at it. And now the other thing was important that happened was the Xpeng's 1024 Tech Day with the X9. I think a lot of it was announcing the target for XNGP deployment, 25 cities by the end of November, 50 by year end. And X9 is actually one more smart EV using the 8295 chip. And they're actually getting 2 radars, getting rid of 2 corner radars. And everything, including Jiyue 01 that just launched, everything's moving toward this kind of the vision-based BEV transformer ADAS, advanced ADAS. So that kind of creates an interesting dilemma for the LiDAR companies.
Yeah.
Right? So it seems like people are ditching LiDARs.
It's a jump, right? Because a year ago, you and I were talking how LiDAR is going to be commoditized, but it jumped 1 or 2 technology cycles where now we don't even need it, because there's sensor fusion going on. Sensor fusion being that all of the information is kind of stitched together from the different 30, 40, 50 different sensors to create a virtual environment that the planning algo looks at and then uses to make decisions of which way what to do, as the environment basically updates hundreds of thousands of times each second. So, man, what's going to happen, Lei, is by the end of 2024, Western automakers are going to have pretty significant ADAS features that are going to be standard in Western vehicles. And so they're going to, again, force feed us because of the China market. With hope, they're also going to try to charge us for it. Whether that'll work is up for debate. But yeah, so let's do this. It is 9:43, Lei. We can talk about a couple of other things that I wanted to bring up, but let's open up the room to anyone who has any questions. would love anyone's thoughts on the Stellantis LeapMotor deal. Even if you don't have a question, would love to hear other people's opinions about that big move by Stellantis this week. So anything else let's do this, because I asked you this last week and I think it's a good thing. What are some of the things that you tweeted about this week that I think you can talk about a little bit?
One thing come to mind is the Cruise. They're they're pausing all their robotaxi fleet after that accident, and it looked as if there might be some ethical problems involved of what they showed in terms of the video, that they did not show the full extent of what happened. I mean, if that's the case, then it's not a technical issue, it's an ethical issue, isn't it? That they're trying to hide something.
Yeah.
That's why I thought, this is another huge step backward when we had that nice experience last year. And now to see this happen, and I mean, Cruise is still losing, I don't know how many billions of, dollars, but.
So for those wondering, a little bit background, Cruise Automation, which is an autonomous vehicle company that's owned by General Motors, has driverless robotaxi pilot in San Francisco. And they had, I want to say 1,000 robotaxis roaming around that you could call and pay to get ridden around the city of San Francisco. Several weeks ago, let's say 5 or 6 weeks ago, there was an accident on Market Street, a hit and run. And the person that got hit ended up getting thrown into the next lane, the lane to the right of the vehicle. And it just so happened that Cruise Robotaxi was in the opposite lane. And so the Robotaxi hit or ran over this person and
stopped. And then it did that maneuver to pull over, which dragged the pedestrian. So I think that was the part that, what do you do in that moment? That right, the corner case.
Yeah. And so the default in 90, I'm making this percentage up, in 85-90% of the time, pulling over is probably the right thing to do.
Right.
But this was probably, again, an edge case that has never come up, even probably in the simulations, right? So the pedestrian that got run over is, I think, still in the hospital. And the the California DMV said that, so they pulled Cruise's license this week for driverless robotaxis in San Francisco. They can still do pilots using a safety driver, but they cannot do driverless anymore. And for the foreseeable future, that it wasn't clear, because to your point, there's some controversy about the data sharing, whether or not all the data was shared with the California DMV by Cruise. And so we'll figure out more of that. Luckily, this pedestrian was not killed, and I'm hoping that there's no permanent injuries. But the Bolt is a heavy car. It's got a huge battery in it. So getting run over and then dragged 20 feet is at 7 miles an hour. So it was going 7 miles an hour as it was dragging. So, it wasn't like it ran over this person and then really quickly. It was like very slow and probably very painful, unfortunately. But yeah, it's, to your point, it's one step forward, 2 steps back. And this, while XPeng talks about launching in 10 cities by the end of this year, 50 cities by the end of 2024, their city NGP. And this is effectively what that is, right? I mean, the driver is the safety driver, but we aren't hearing much about ADAS rollouts in the United States. So it's a huge contrast, I think, between the US and China, how Baidu seems to be making announcements with Apollo, new pilots, more partnerships. Pony, same thing. WeRide is about to go IPO. And then Cruise and Waymo, the two most notable US AV companies. Waymo is actually being very, very quiet, whereas Cruise took the opposite, and they were they were taking full page ads out in New York Times talking about how drivers suck and robotaxis are better.
Now that's kind of backfired a little bit after all of this.
That's a little bit of the whole Silicon Valley thing, right? Like in your face.
It's kind of true, but when you have something like this happen, then you kind of
Yeah, we have to take this seriously. I hope that there's a more robust framework around some of this that the U.S. government kind of puts in place, Department of Transportation, so that we can still continue progress. Commercial side, I think commercial trucking, they're still piloting some of these autonomous robo trucks, but yeah, dude, it's a far cry from you and I spending time in China earlier this year and getting in 3, 4, 5 robotaxis and just kind of enjoying the capabilities, right? So
a couple of investments out of Saudi Arabia.
Oh man,
one for Pony and the other one for a company we haven't heard in ages, Bianca. Not investment, but a strategic cooperation kind of. So all of a sudden, this is Saudi Arabia investment. It's becoming a recurring theme for some of the China EV and AV companies.
We should also note that I think Cruise has a pilot in Abu Dhabi, I want to say, or Dubai, one of the two.
Yeah.
And then WeRide has something.
WeRide, I think, was also in Saudi Arabia this week. Yeah.
And so I think what we're seeing is Saudi Arabia really, really trying to diversify out of oil. I think it's going to be pretty hard for them to do that. And we're also seeing India try to play both sides between some of the diplomatic and business challenges that the U.S. has with China, and vice versa. So let me take a look at my newsletter, Lay, see if there's anything worth talking about.
And then BYD in Japan, right? The only thing I'll say about the Japan Mobility Show is it felt like all those Japanese brands, what they show, the concept EVs, they all look the same to me.
Yeah.
And then BYD front and center with the U8 doing its turntable thing. Tank turn,
that was
that's
cool.
what it's called.
That was cool. Yeah. So I saw like 1 or 2 tweets that were like, I didn't realize that there wasn't on a turntable. So
that's funny. And then California Governor Gavin Newsom.
That's huge news, actually.
Yeah, it's looks like he's having a great time in
China. All the ubiquitous photo ops, right, on the Great Wall, talking to Xi Jinping on stage. I mean, that was huge, right? Meeting with Xi was huge.
Yeah, visiting, also checking out the UA. Looks like he was trying to bring 2 of them back.
So. Yeah, going down to Shenzhen, visiting BYD. And
I think he's ending the trip by visiting Tesla Shanghai Giga, which is a California company, right? So,
well, it's actually Texas
company, but formerly,
Yeah, yeah. So anyways, that's all I had, man. I think we did a good job unpacking the Stellantis. There'll be more. We'll learn more and we'll talk more.
Oh yeah. It's the start of like I said, this is a whole new ball game, and you trying different ways to play and make bets and investments.
And I should note that I didn't get to drive a LeapMotor car, but I went to a couple malls where a LeapMotor retail store was, and I got in. Quality's a little iffy. It's okay, but again, remember, it's relative to the price of the vehicle, which in China is about a $15,000 car. So the coupe was super small, and smaller than, for Americans, smaller than a Civic, like a Civic hatchback, much smaller than that. Bigger than a Hongguang Mini EV, but really small. And coupes don't sell that well in China, so it was a strange first vehicle to launch. But then they hit their stride when they launched that SUV, and then sales went down, and then they started selling the EREV, and sales shot up again. And so it's been a rocky road for LeapMotor. So good for them for getting that check from Stellantis. Hopefully this creates an easier path for them for growth and opportunity. So
Yeah, we keep a list. So two of them is done. So see who's coming next, right? And what was the Volkswagen was $740 million investment.
Yep.
So you add the two together, it's over 2.3 billion, almost 2.5 billion dollars of investment into two Chinese companies already. So
There's going to be a lot of cultural challenges, OB, like organizational behavior challenges that I think we'll be hearing about behind the scenes probably. So we'll let you all know if and what we hear. So everyone, thanks for joining again this week. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We will talk with you all later.
Yep. And then we talk October sales next time. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Li, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.